Rich, for reminding us that in the midst of suffering that we endure, the persecution in the world that we live in, that this is not permanent, that we have hope that is beyond this world. Folks, I want to tell you guys about a 19th century Scotland man who had potential, he had promise that was told to him. He had the future ahead of him. And he was about to be married. He was engaged to his lovely fiancée. And then all of a sudden, he gets a degenerative eye disease. He's hospitalized, and all of a sudden, he is blind. And after him being blind, he becomes brokenhearted because his fiancée breaks off their engagement. So everything and anything at once kind of hits this man's life, and his soul is just so overwhelmed of why the things that he's going through. But here's the amazing thing. This man, George Matheson, in 5 minutes of finding out that everything is going on in his life, he penned these words of a hymn called, "O Love That Will Not Let Me Go." He said, "O love that will not let me go, I rest my weary soul in thee. I give thee back the life I owe, that in thy ocean depths its flow may richer, fuller be. O joy that seekest me through pain, I cannot close my heart to thee. I trace the rainbow through the rain, and feel the promise is not vain. That morn shall tearless be, I trace the rainbow through the rain." From the depths and despair of George Matheson's life, he endured personal struggles and suffering in his life. If you haven't noticed that the life that we live, you are going to suffer in one form, in one way or the other, because this is a broken and sinful world that we live in, so we will suffer. But a lot of times, suffering comes about of our personal choices. If it's a personal choice that we have inflicted on ourselves or past indiscrepancies, then we understand why we would face that particular suffering. But what happens when you suffer for what is doing right? If you will, I want you guys to look with me tonight in the New Testament in 1 Peter. And as you're turning there to 1 Peter, I want to give you guys the scenery of what is taking place. Because this is what's going on. Peter writes to the Christians in Asia Minor. These Christians are suffering, not because of their past indiscretions or poor choices that they made. No, they're suffering because of the relationship, their faith in Jesus Christ. And so, if you can imagine this, that the year is 64 AD, and a lot of the believers in Asia Minor could not find work because the Jewish merchants wouldn't give them the time of day. They wouldn't give them work because they felt like they were rebelling against Judaism. And you couldn't get work from the Greek merchants because the Greek merchants didn't want to upset their loyal customers. Their loyal customers didn't want change. They were all about polytheism and Judaism. They didn't want things to change. So can you imagine that without work, that means that you can't purchase food. And if you can't purchase food, then you can't feed your family. Now imagine as you're holding an infant and you hear the hunger pains and the cries because they're malnourished, or maybe the child runs to the parent and hugs them for one last time and gives them one last breath because they don't have any food to eat. This is the scenario that is taking place in 64 AD because they have placed their faith in Jesus Christ, so they endure suffering. If any of you guys don't know history, the Emperor Nero hates Christians. The point that he wanted to exterminate them. He snatches them up, he arrests them, he throws them in the Colosseum to feed them to the lions. But one of Nero's heinous tortures known in history is that he would wrap Christians up in wax, impale them, and then burn them to have light for his rose garden. This is what the Christians suffered because of their faith in the truth, the way, and the life of Jesus Christ. And Peter writes to believers just as he writes to us, to point to the suffering servant of Jesus Christ, that there is hope in the midst of our suffering. Now, tonight, I gotta be honest with you. This is probably going to be one of the most difficult sermons that I have ever studied for, just because this is a very sensible topic. But suffering takes place in our lives. It is a fact of life. And a lot of times we don't like to talk about it. A lot of times pastors don't want to speak about it. But this is what something God has laid on my heart about a month and a half ago. And before we go into prayer, I want to read a passage to you all, because this has always been my prayer. In 1 Corinthians chapter 1, it says, "For Christ did not send me to baptize, but to preach the gospel, not with wisdom of words, lest the cross of Christ should be made no effect." I say that because tonight, this is not about me, but this is the power and the word of God spoken to you all about what do we do? How do we go about our lives in the midst of suffering? Let us pray. Father God, it is a joy and an honor and a privilege to be in your house, to be in your presence. And Father, I pray, and I know every time that we go before you, a lot of times that I mention this. But Father, I pray, Lord, that we just allow everything to lay aside. And then, Lord, I don't even understand why you would use a broken person vessel like myself. But Father, I pray that you speak through me to penetrate the hearts and to grab the attention of everyone here tonight that is represented. That, Father, you have a specific purpose and a specific message geared directly for each and every individual that is here tonight and is listening online. Father, we give you our time, we give you our hearts, we give you your praise. In Jesus' name, amen. Now, if we can turn to 1 Peter chapter 3. The whole aspect, the whole main idea is attitude of suffering. That is the main idea, the attitude of suffering. For the next 2 weeks, I'm going to be going over this particular topic of what does it look like in the midst of suffering. How do we go about this? And Peter lays out 3 specific attitudes when a person is suffering. And in these attitudes, we're going to look at certain biblical principles that is laid out for us. So, if we will look at verses 8. 1 Peter chapter 3, verses 8. And I'm going to expound verse by verse first. It says, "Finally, all of you be of one mind, having compassion for one another. Love as brothers, be tender-hearted, be courteous." So the very first thing that we see here is that Peter is writing to the Christians. He's writing to the believers to cultivate Christian love, and he writes 5 specific qualities that Christians need to display when suffering. So the first attitude of this that we see is the attitude of suffering before Christians. If you're taking notes, if you look at the word finally means to sum it all up. Peter is saying, okay, the law of Moses, the law of the Word of God was summed up in love. So when it comes to all human relationships, everything has to be summed up and fulfilled in love. And we see this in 5 different characteristics, 5 different qualities. He says, finally, all of you be of one mind. One mind means to be united in the work of Christ. not have anything to separate us or distract us. And what I mean by united is, regardless of the denomination, that we are followers of Jesus Christ, those who claim the name of Jesus, that we are believing in the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, that He is the Son of the living God, that He is the Messiah. Because a lot of times in American culture, we argue and debate amongst ourselves about the little things. And Peter is saying, be of one mind. Having compassion. Compassion actually means to kind of put yourself, to carry the burden of someone else who is in that situation that is suffering. Is the opposite of being self-centered and selfishness. He goes on, finally, all of you be of one mind, having compassion for one another. Love as brothers. Peter is talking about being affectionate towards your family, that you're being loyal. Do families have problems? Yes. Can the body of Christ be messy, dysfunctional people? Yes. But it's because of Christ's love that indwells the body of Christ that we see past those differences. Be tender-hearted just means to be deeply emotionally involved with that person. Be courteous does not necessarily mean to be polite and open a door for someone. Courteous actually means to humble yourself, make yourself below, make yourself low, make yourself as a servant as Christ has served us, that you serve one another. So, the attitude of suffering before Christians, the application, so what? What does this mean? It means to be a blessing to the church. Be a blessing to the church. Let's skip verse 9, we'll come back to that. Verse 10 through 12, it says, for he who would love life and see good days, let him refrain his tongue from evil and his lips from speaking deceit. Let him turn away from evil and do good. Let him seek peace and pursue it. For the eyes of the Lord are on the righteous, and his ears are open to their prayers. But the face of the Lord is against those who do evil. Peter inserts Psalm 34, 12 through 16. During the time that these people are enduring persecution and suffering, Peter writes to them and says, look, I want you to take courage. I want you to focus, not necessarily the situation, but take courage in the resurrection of Christ and choose to love. Choose to love. So the second attitude we see this is the attitude of suffering before God. So before God, Peter lays out 4 qualities of before God we should do what? Before God, number 1, we should, when you look in verse 10, it says, he who would love life and see good days. To choose to love life. Good does not necessarily mean that, okay, well, if I give my life to Christ, then everything is going to be rainbows and unicorns and magic charms, and I'm going to live perfectly and never have any bad days, and I'm going to live in this perfect bubble. No, it means actually the opposite. Good in this text right here that Peter is talking about is that when you are going through your suffering, when you're going through a situation, you're going through persecution, God Himself, through His Son, Jesus Christ, helps and blesses you, consoles you, counsels you through your situation of your suffering. Peter also says this. It says, if you look at it, it says, he who would love life. You know, you have 3 different choices when it comes to life. You can endure life, meaning that you can just kind of grin and bear it, and it's just kind of a burden. You endure life. You can escape life as if you're running away from the battlefield, or you can enjoy life. Enjoy life knowing that God is in control, that God is sovereign, that God knows what is better and best for us. And because we know that and understand and stand on that, that is how we can enjoy life, despite the suffering, despite what we go through. He continues and says, let him refrain his tongue from evil and his lips from speaking deceit. Okay, so before God we should love life, love our enemies. Let him turn away from evil and do good. We love one another. And then 11 to 12, it says, let him turn away from evil and do good. Let him seek peace and pursue it. For the eyes of the Lord are on the righteous, and his ears are open to their prayers. But the face of the Lord is against those who do evil. If you notice in your text, if you're taking notes, in verse 11, there's 3 specific action words that Peter pins. He says, I want you to seek, turn, and pursue what? Pursue peace. The peace of God. Folks, I'll be dead honest with you. There is nothing in this world, nothing. When you are suffering, whether it's physically, emotionally, spiritually, whatever's going on in your life, there is nothing that will give you peace. No human being, no toy, no thing, nothing but the peace of God. And as I was reading an article this past week, it was a married couple. They had a 4-year-old boy, and a 16-month-old girl. And the wife, Rochelle, and the husband, Gary, Rochelle's mother wanted to watch the kids. She just wanted to spend time with her grandkids. And so they went over to her house. Well, the following morning at 7 a.m., the grandmother called Rochelle and said, you need to get to the house ASAP because it's on fire. Well, all 4, the grandmother and the grandfather, the 16-month-old and the 4-year-old, all died in a fire. And as I'm reading this article, Gary and Rochelle were churchgoers. But due to the situation, they became very depressed because Rochelle saw her identity as a mother. I have no kids now anymore. What is the purpose of my life? What am I going to do? And Gary's depressed because him and his wife haven't really been together at all. It keeps separating they're severing the relationship because of the situation. They buried 4 people in 2 days. And it wasn't until somebody from church invited them to a retreat. And at this retreat, what was interesting in the article is that both of them gave their lives to Christ. And what was profound is that Gary said that it was by the grace, it was the peace of God that got them to be reconciled to God, their relationship with God, but reconciled in their marriage. And it was the peace of God that allowed them to go through life every single day. It was the peace of God that consoled them. It was the peace of God that took care of them. It was the peace of God that later on in the article that did bless them later on, that they were taking care of other kids, nephews, nieces, and so forth. It was the peace of God that allowed them to minister to other people in those specific situations. I want to look now at come back to verse 9. We'll come back up to 8. It says, finally, all of you be of one mind, having compassion for another, love as brothers, be tenderhearted, be courteous, not returning evil for evil or reviling for reviling, but on the contrary, blessing, knowing that you were called to this, that you may inherit a blessing. Here's the third attitude. The attitude of suffering before unbelievers. Before unbelievers. The world is looking at us. The unbelievers are looking at us and pointing fingers. Okay, where's your God now? You're suffering. What are you going to do? Where's God? And so in verses 9, Peter says, look, if you're a true follower of Christ, do not repay evil with evil. Because Christ has forgiven you. You forgive those who persecute you, who go against you. So it's bless those who curse you. If you're taking notes, you want to look at verses 9. That blessings is mentioned twice in one verse. The first blessing in the context means this. It means that it gives to give praise, to give thanks. Wow, really? Yeah. Well, thank you, Lord. I am suffering. Because you suffered on the behalf of me, I give you praise. But not only that, but that same word is to give praise, to give thanks, but to also speak well of the person who is going against you. And you say, well, Pastor, that's difficult. Yeah, because it's humanly impossible, but anything is possible with God. So the second one, it says in verse 9, the second blessing, it says that you may inherit a blessing. This means that it is a gift. is a generous gift given to you. It is the position of God's favor that's poured out to you. What that blessing looks like. I'll tell you a perfect example is, I've been reading this book. This is the second time I'm reading this book. Rivka Berry, Hiding in the Light. She got international and national news at the age of 16. She grew up in a very strict, devout, abusive Muslim family. She gave her life to Christ at 12 years old, and her life was threatened at 16. And so she writes her story about everything from the time that she gave her life to Christ, all of that. But there was an account in this book that in the Muslim culture, especially in her family also, women had no say. There was no opinion, nothing. It was male dominant. And she recalls multiple times in this book that she gives the accounts of not only her dad physically beating her up and abusing her, but also her brother. And it just compelled me that at the age of 12, when she gave her life to Christ, she saw her brother in a different light. In the midst of her suffering, she saw her brother in a different light, that he was starving for attention. He was asking these questions. There's got to be more to life than this. There's got to be more than just regiment. But he was taking his frustration, his internal pain, out on his sister. But after that, she was compelled by the love of Christ when she gave her life to Christ. She spent 4 weeks praying for her brother of what to get him for a birthday gift. Now, you and I were like, big deal. In Muslim culture, and specifically in their family, they didn't celebrate birthdays like you and I do here in America. So she knew that her brother wanted these special gloves for football. So she spent 4 weeks praying. And she got the gloves. And I remember reading in the book that when she gave it, it wasn't about what she received from him, but she understood the gift that God gave her. The hope in Jesus Christ, the relationship that she has with the Father through Jesus, that she could give in a practical sense, in a practical way to her brother. Here is this: I love you, I forgive you. You know, Peter, in verses 13, he says, "And who is he who will harm you if you become followers of what is good? But even if you should suffer for righteousness' sake, you are blessed. Do not be afraid of the threats, nor be troubled." So Peter introduces grace in the midst of suffering, and that we should fear God, be in awe of God, be in just reverence of who he